Hi everybody, welcome to the DRF Breeding Report. I'm Dan Illman along with Nicole Russo, and in this week's edition of the Breeding Report, we're going to take a look at some sire trends for the 2018 Kentucky Derby, because there are three stallions that dominate this Derby, Nicole: Scat Daddy, Medaglia d'Oro, and Curlin. They have 9 of the 20 Kentucky Derby entrants. Let's start with Scat Daddy, a winner at distances between 5.5 furlongs at a mile and an eighth. He came roaring into the 2007 Derby off consecutive wins in the Fountain of Youth and the Florida Derby. Things didn't work out in the Kentucky Derby. He was retired after that race, but boy, has he been a great stallion.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Scat Daddy's racetrack performance, because I think we forget about that a little bit in the wake of what a great stallion he's become. He was a very prominent player on the Triple Crown Trail in his season, ran off the board in the Kentucky Derby against one of the strongest 3-year-old crops of recent memory. That was also the year of Curlin, while incurring a career-ending injury in that race. As a stallion, this, of course, Scat Daddy died in late 2015, a tremendous loss to the breed. I think he's got a couple more crops coming up, including this. My gosh, what can you say about he's going to have 4 starters in the race at this moment, 20% of the field.
He has sired multiple champions in Europe and South America. We look at some of his top earners in North America. Many of them tend to be fillies, horses like Lady Aurelia or Decita or Lady of Shamrock or Celestine or Nickname or Harmonize. But he's got 4 in this year's Kentucky Derby, hoping to break that filly trend. And let's start with the horse that'll likely be the favorite. Let's watch Justify win the Santa Anita Derby over Bolt d'Oro, a son of Medaglia d'Oro. And what can you say about Justify other than he has been absolutely brilliant?
Yeah, and you know, his way of moving, the brilliance that he's shown, really lines up to what some of what you see of Scat Daddy's better offspring. Scat Daddy, a very versatile stallion. We'll talk a little bit in this segment, I think, about some of the criticisms of him, that, you know, he's a better turf sire than a dirt sire. But I think his runners are very versatile, and the sire is only half. Obviously, Justify has done all of his work on dirt, and he's got a strong American dirt type female family underneath them.
Justify's broodmare sire, the versatile Ghost Sapper, of course, able to stretch that brilliant speed to 1.25 miles in the Breeders' Cup Classic. I do look at the bottom of this pedigree, and I see a lot of middle distance influences. Justify's a half to the Lieutenant, who stakes placed at a mile, won at 1 1/16. The Dam was grade 3 stakes placed at a mile at Ellis Park. She won at 1 1/16. And while the second Dam was grade 1 placed in the 1.25 Coaching Club American Oaks, she was very well beaten that day, and her best win, at least from a distance standpoint, came at 1 1/16. Are you a little concerned about the middle distance influences on the bottom of this pedigree? Are you concerned about Justify's ability to get the extra furlong of the Derby?
I am concerned about him, you know, in that regard, but that comes more from the likely race shape than his pedigree. He's got such a high cruising speed, but he's certainly not going to have an uncontested lead or an easy time of things in the full Derby field.
Hoping to break the UAE Derby jinx is Scat Daddy's son, Mendelssohn, a $3 million Keeneland yearling purchase. Let's watch him devastate this field. And it was a weak field in the UAE Derby, but he was just so impressive. And when you talk about a pedigree, Mendelssohn has it all, being a half to the 11-time Grade 1 stakes winner Beholder, who of course won at 1.25 miles in the Pacific Classic. She will be a first ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt about that.
Oh, absolutely. And Mendelssohn, another great example of how the sire is only half of the pedigree. You know, the big question coming into the UAE Derby was, how would he run on dirt, having done all his prior work on turf? Of course, last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf winner and synthetic. But, you know, he comes from that great female family. Leslie's Lady, of course, producing Beholder and a number of other, good runners, good horses. And Mendelssohn lived up to that by showing that versatility that's so typical of Scat Daddy. And one thing I do want to mention here is that if you're a student of pedigree and you were paying attention last fall, Scat Daddy closed at 26-1 in the Derby Sire Future wager put on by Churchill Downs. Justify, the current Derby favorite, and Mendelssohn both going to be much shorter prices than that on Derby Day.
Mendelssohn also a half to Into Mischief, winner of the Grade 1 Cash Call Futurity on the old cushion track at Hollywood Park. That was his only two-turn start, interestingly enough. And while the dam was a stakes winner at 6 furlongs and only able to stretch her speed successfully to 6.5, she gets plenty of stamina from her sire, and that was Tricky Creek, who was a nice long-winded handicap horse back in the day. So I don't think we have too many concerns about Mendelssohn getting the 1.25 miles. Maybe the pace will be a little bit quicker than what he's used to in those UAE Derby races or turf races, but distance shouldn't be a problem, right?
No, I'm not concerned about the distance whatsoever with him.
Flameaway is tough, resilient, and hardy, just like his sire, Scat Daddy. And we're going to go back to his victory in the Grade 3 Sam F. Davis Stakes, 3 starts back, where he went to the lead, and he just fends off this odds-on favorite Catholic boy in the stretch, and he has been far from disgraced in his 2 subsequent starts. Runner-up efforts in both the Tampa Bay Derby and the Bluegrass, again, by Scat Daddy, his broodmare sire, Fusaichi Pegasus, of course, a Kentucky Derby winner.
Yeah, and that grittiness Flameaway showed, as you referenced, very, very much like his sire. I think about some of Scat Daddy's races, such as the Fountain of Youth, where, he just gutted it out. And Flameaway the same way. So, sometimes these horses come to him in his races, and he looks as though he might be beaten, and, he comes right back swinging. And he's another one who really shows the versatility of this stallion. Flameaway's run well on turf, on dirt, and synthetic.
He has won at distances from 4.5 furlongs to 1.16 miles. The question is, can he get the 1.25 miles? He's a half to Ellen Vannon, who was a stakes winner at 1.16 miles on a synthetic surface. The Dam won going 6.5 on synthetic. She's a half to Essential Edge, who won the Canadian going 9 furlongs on the turf. But if you really go back in this pedigree, you see a lot of stamina influences and a lot of European stamina influences. The third Dam won at 11 furlongs. Am I reaching far too back here for Flameaway, or do you think he can get this 1.25 miles? I think his grittiness really helps him out.
His grittiness definitely helps him out. I do think he's going to be, if not on the lead, definitely in kind of that second flight of horses up toward the pace in the Derby. I expect the pace to be hot, but his toughness really helps him out. I think when other horses start backing up at the top of the stretch, he's still going to be fighting, and I don't know if he's good enough to win the Kentucky Derby, but I know that they're going to have to go through him.
The 4th Scat Daddy entrant in this year's Derby, Combatant. And Combatant was third in the Rebel Stakes. We're going to take a look at this horse. He's still eligible for a Now Winners of 2 Life, but he has multiple graded stakes place. He finishes third in this Rebel behind one of the Kentucky Derby favorites, Magnum Moon, and he followed this race up with yet another solid 4th place finish in the Arkansas Derby. His Dam has been very, very productive. She's by Boundary, more of a turf miler kind of stallion. He was a dirt sprinter himself.
Yeah, Boundary kind of interesting. He kind of throws a little bit of everything. Combatant, another one who's just a tough horse, not very flashy, very consistent. And I mean that's what's gotten him to the Derby, one of the final horses into the field on points, but he's just picked up a few here, a few there. He always seems to run a race.
Boundary, the sire, of course, of Big Brown, winner of the Kentucky Derby. Combatant is kin to 3 black type earners. He's a 3/4 to Mythical Border, who is Group 2 placed, going 5 furlongs on the turf. A half to Long Lashes, Group 3 winner, going 7 furlongs on the turf, was able to win at 1.70 miles, but a lot of middle distance ability. I'm a little bit concerned about Combatant and the 1.25 miles. He reminds me of his older stablemate Untrapped, who was able to win at 1.125 miles, but I like him better at shorter distances.
Yeah, kind of the shorter end of those middle distances, such as a mile, 1.16 miles. I think those are going to be more his wheelhouse.
Another stallion represented with multiple interests in this year's Kentucky Derby is the great Medaglia d'Oro, who is one of the best 9 furlong horses I've ever seen. And while he did win the Travers going 1.25 miles over a sloppy track, he was 1 for 7 at 10 furlongs. Horses like Pleasantly Perfect and Candy Ride and Valpone and Syrah, they always seem to have his number at 10 furlongs or higher, but boy has he been a tremendous sire of Preakness winner Rachel Alexandra. But even though he's had horses like Talismanic and Emshowich recently, Medaglia d'Oro has sort of been known as a filly or mare sire.
Yeah, a little bit. And you've mentioned the same, with Scat Daddy. For whatever reason, kind of at certain points in a horse's trajectory, some of them seem to be better at one or the other. That was actually a criticism of Malibu Moon several years back until he broke through with horses like Derby winner Orb. But Medaglia d'Oro, two very good sons coming into the Derby this year. He sired more greater Group 1 winners than any other North American-based stallion last year. And most of those, did well around 2 turns, including these two, Bolt d'Oro and Enticed. And even Medaglia d'Oro's daughter, Bar of Gold, winner of the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, was a stakes performer at kind of elongated middle distances, 1 mile and a 16th at other points in her campaign, that wonderful, versatile runner.
Let's talk about Bolt d'Oro. Figures to be one of the favorites in the Kentucky Derby. We're going to take a look at his performance in the San Felipe, his seasonal debut. He's already bounced off McKinsey once. They're going to bang off each other a couple of more times in the stretch. While Bolt d'Oro will finish a head shy of McKinsey, he'll be placed first via disqualification. And we saw his subsequent performance, the second behind Justify in the Santa Anita Derby. He's out of an AP Indy mare. Of course, AP Indy won the Belmont and the Breeders' Cup Classic. And this Medaglia d'Oro AP Indy breeding nick has worked very, very well, producing horses like Kentucky Oaks winner Plum Pretty, Jenny Wiley winner Dickinson.
Very well. And, going a step further, Enticed is actually bred on the same cross out of a Mineshaft mare. Mineshaft, of course, a son of AP Indy. It's a very productive cross, as we see right here. And Bolt d'Oro has got a half brother who's a stakes winner at 1 mile. A lot of distance ability, some speed further back in the family. It's the family of Sensational, and he seems able to tap into both aspects of his pedigree. He's got a high cruising speed.
Dam won 3 synthetic mile races. The second Dam, a multiple grade 3 stakes winner at 1 mile and a 16th. Tired just a little bit behind the brilliant Justify in the Santa Anita Derby. His first start at 1 mile and an 1/8. How do you feel about him at 1 mile and a quarter?
He's another one that we're going to have to watch, I think, the race shape very closely for. I think in the Santa Anita Derby, he just ran into a very, very good horse who got a little bit brave on the lead and was able to turn him back as well. I don't think that's going to, be the case for other horses in the Kentucky Derby.
Medaglia d'Oro also has Gotham winner Enticed. We're going to watch Enticed's victory in the Gotham, geared down late of this 1-turn mile affair after passing 35-1 pace setter Old Time Revival. He came back to run a good second to Vino Rosso. We'll talk about him in a moment. Enticed is out of the 3-time Grade 1 stakes winner It's Tricky, who won those Grade 1s at distances between 1 mile and 1 mile and an 1/8. Some might argue a little better at 1 mile and a 16th. I'd argue maybe only because in those 1 mile and an 1/8 races, she was up against Royal Delta, who might have just been a better horse. The second Dam was a Grade 3 stakes winner at 9 furlongs as well. Enticed has a strong, strong pedigree.
Yeah, and oh my gosh, It's Tricky just faced a very class group of fillies and mares, not only running into the teeth of Royal Delta, but running against that year's Kentucky Oaks winner Plum Pretty several times. It was a very competitive bunch. And It's Tricky, as I mentioned, a Mineshaft mare definitely taps into that AP Indy kind of stamina ability. And Enticed, already a Grade 2 winner around two turns at Churchill Downs last fall in the Kentucky Jockey Club.
Curlin, not to be outdone, has 3 horses expected for this year's Kentucky Derby. And boy, Curlin is just the example of a young classic stallion.
Yeah, Curlin, we keep coming back to this stat, but it bears repeating in this context. Curlin's got a classic winner or classic placed runner from each of his crops to date, starting off with 2013 Belmont winner Palace Malice, Preakness runner-up Ride on Curlin the following year. Keen Ice, third in the Belmont Stakes in 2015, came back to defeat American Pharoah going 1 mile and a quarter in the Traverse. 2016 Derby runner-up and Preakness winner Exaggerator, and Irish Warcry keeping the streak alive last year with his strong performance in the Belmont.
And while I thought Medaglia d'Oro was a true 9 furlong horse that could win at 10 under the right circumstances, Curlin was a true 1 mile and a quarter horse. No surprise his horses have excelled in these classic races. Let's begin with Solimini, who won the Los Al Futurity but was then disqualified. Lots of bumping and banging around in the stretch. You see him on the far outside here, ready to take over against Instilled Regard and McKinsey. He's had 2 starts for Bob Baffert this year. They've both been okay. I can understand why some folks have been a little bit underwhelmed because he didn't win them. He's out of a Stormcat mare, and Curlin and Stormcat have crossed very, very well with some nice turf horses like Diversey Harbor and Miss Frost.
Yeah, and Solimene also from one of the most active female families going today. This is the immediate family of juvenile champion Midshipman, immediate family also of Frosted, who of course we think of first for his scintillating Met Mile victory, but he was also second to American Pharoah in the Belmont, ran well at those longer distances. Another one who was maybe a victim of the group of horses he was running against, horses like American Pharoah, California Chrome, but Frosted sneaky good at these longer classic distances.
Vino Rosso is the next Curlin horse we're going to discuss, and we'll watch him take down Enticed in the Wood Memorial at 1 1/8. And it really isn't a surprise that as the distances get longer, Vino Rosso gets better. He's damn as a half to Commissioner, who won the Hawthorne Gold Cup at 1 1/4 and came oh so close to winning the Belmont at 12 furlongs. Vino Rosso, from a pure pedigree standpoint, one of the standouts in this year's Derby.
Absolutely. And looking at him, he strikes me as a big, robust horse who's going to get better with the experience. Curlin was very good early in his career, of course, came into the Derby with so much hype and finished third there. And I think his experience did help him grow up, because I really saw a different horse from the Derby to the Preakness with Curlin. He went in a boy and came out a man, and that's what I'm seeing from Vino Rosso as he's progressed with each race.
The third Curlin entrant, Good Magic, last year's 2-year-old champion, got back on the beam in the Bluegrass. Let's take a look at that race right now. He made an early move into the teeth of this pace, and he kept right on going to win his first start at 1 1/8, maybe getting a little bit tired late. His broodmare Sire, hard spun, I thought was better at middle distances, but he ran a game second in the 2007 Kentucky Derby. This dam was a multiple stakes winner at 1 mile. She was able to win at 1 70 yards, and the dam's a half to a grade 3 stakes winning turf miler named Take the Ribbon. So I see a little bit of middle distance ability in the bottom of this pedigree, but with Curlin on top, I mean, it's just so hard to doubt this stallion.
Definitely. And Good Magic, another one who I think is at his best as he continues to run. You look at his campaign last year, and he peaked that third start in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. The Derby will be his third start of the spring, back off the layoff. He definitely improved from his first start this year to the Bluegrass. I think he's in position to take another step forward. And you mentioned Take the Ribbon and some other horses. If you look under that second dam on his page, this female family has crossed very well with Curlin, with a couple of graded and group stakes performers under there by the stallion.
3 superstar stallions represented by 9 entrants in the 2018 Kentucky Derby: Scat Daddy, Medaglia d'Oro, and Curlin. Next week, Nicole will be joined by Joe Nevels of DRF Breeding for the Breeding Report. They will give their pedigree picks for the 2018 Kentucky Derby. We're getting close to Derby time. They'll see you next week.